So, Lisa, starting earlier in your career in the agency world, what was your perspective at the time of how agencies considered commerciality?
So, I started I won't say where I started, you probably can work that out, in quite a large direct marketing agency. And I think actually, having then gone to work in an advertising agency, it probably was pretty commercial. But as an account exec, I don't really talk about the numbers at all. I'm not actually sure who thought about the numbers in the organisation. I suspect those conversations happened around a boardroom table. We did, however, talk about client numbers. So one of the things that I am very grateful for, and those of you who did start your careers in direct marketing or indeed in digital, we did at least talk about the numbers of our clients, and were very, very focused on driving growth for our clients, whether that was tactical, short-term, can you sell that car park for me, or longer-term strategic growth. We were focused on growth. I know direct marketing in those days was seen as the grubby end of the industry, but we did talk a lot about growth. We didn't talk that much about our own growth or the revenue we were driving for our clients. Maybe they just didn't think the account execs cared enough about it. I think the other thing that's really interesting, and it's come up today and struck me all the way through my career, but has particularly struck me since I've joined a client organisation, is we focus far too much on what we create in agencies, the stuff we produce, rather than the value it creates, which probably sounds like one is the route to the other, and it definitely is. But if we can think more broadly about solving problems strategically, the toasty thought, for example, it is much more palatable to clients. You are much more likely to make the revenue and the profit you need because they are entirely focused on outcomes, entirely. And talking about that nice creative idea, or creative directors talking about the art direction, is fantastic in the moment, but it is not the conversations that are happening in boardrooms.
So if we can stick with that for a moment, because
Sure.
it comes back to...
Let's come back to Nigel.
So what Nigel was talking about do you wait for the brief or do you have a conversation about the context for the brief? In practical terms, Lisa, because you've done the job of running pieces of business on the agency side, how do you think agencies are best placed to have that conversation with their clients and be that partner rather than that executional supplier?
So I think it's a couple of things. I think it is, I'd go a sort of stage back from Nigel's 3 R's, and it's about the people you have and their mindset and how they think about their client's business. So if you think about the outcomes you're going to create for that business, you're going to have a much more, I was about to say profitable, I didn't mean it in financial terms, but I guess it works in both, conversation with your clients. So I do think in order to get into a shared brief and to be a trusted advisor, it's not enough. I mean, Brian talked earlier about advertising agencies having been the trusted advisors of clients back in the day, and they always had their seat at the top table. And I remember when I first took on the role as Group CEO at M&C, it was one of the things that I had very strongly in my mind was how do we recreate that, but in a way that is more set to a model world where we can think. I don't think advertising agencies really thought about the context in which they were delivering the advertising then. It was a different environment, it was a different world, and there was a lot greater empathy for the creative industries, unfortunately, than there is, or unfortunately now, than there is now. But I do think that real understanding of commercial outcomes and making sure that the people that you put in the room with those senior clients who are networking with them, having that ongoing dialogue, really understand business. They do want to be on those earnings calls and really understand the outcomes. But, have that rare ability to also work with creative people, because the other thing is not to lose the magic that you have defined as your output, whether that is strategic output, whether it is about numbers and strategy, or whether it's about creativity. Remember what your magic is, and be proud of that. I think there's a lot of beating ourselves up in this industry at the moment, and I think you can still be proud of what you do, but understand the context in which the work you produce will live and survive.
So, talking about context, and I'm going to ask one more question and then encourage you to ask a question. When we see it on the screen, I'll play you in.
There's no question.
They'll come, I'm sure. Won't they, Joyce?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get typing, Joyce.
Switch to the boardroom at Virgin and what it is to be that brand advocate around the board table in a client-side business.
Yeah.
Can you give us a bit of perspective on that, what growth and commerciality means?
So I think, interestingly, Nigel talked earlier about the context and the pressures around change. The one thing that I didn't feel was in there, and it's quite relevant to this, is the changing consumer need from a business. He talked a little bit about it with regard to trust. But I think there is tension in our boardroom between being purpose-led and wanting to sort of transform as well as drive performance. And I'm absolutely sure that's true of all client businesses. How can we deliver and be the sort of business our consumers expect us to be and our people want us to be, whilst still continuing to drive growth? Arguably often driving up your costs, giving away some of your profit, but still want to be. I think the other thing that was the most profound shock to me, I don't know how many other clients were in the room, is literally they thought of marketing. And remember, there's a distinction. I'm brand, not marketing. That's a big distinction in my world. That might be a narrow Virgin distinction, by the way, but it is a distinction. They just talked about it as colouring in. It was just not interesting. The only thing that was talked about with regard to brand are the outcomes it delivers for our businesses. Because remember, people are paying for our brand. My clients are the people who run the Virgin companies, and they pay a royalty to have our brand on their business. So we have to make the brand work. I don't think that, though, is any different from Virgin Atlantic's boardroom discussion or Virgin Media's boardroom discussion. Yes, they talk about the purpose of their organisation. They do have people on their agenda at board level, but they don't necessarily, and I'm sure this is true of all boardrooms, they don't talk about the creative output or the advertising agency they're working with, or any agency at the board table. And getting that conversation on the agenda is about outcomes. What will it drive?
So I'm going to ask you for a piece of advice to the aspiring account handlers in the room, because I know there are some rising stars here today, and ask you, the rising star account handler that you were at a certain point in your career trajectory, what advice would you give them now, based on your experience at Virgin, as to how they can change the conversation, or what kind of conversations they need to be having, how they best equip their clients to represent the needs of brand and marketing?
So I'm not sure it's changed that dramatically. I think the great account handlers that are rising stars in their organisations will already care passionately about business and the businesses that they work with. The best relationships I have had with my clients, and I'm sure it's true for all of you, is the ones where you understand their business, they understand the context in which they operate every day, the different pressures they're under, so you're both their friend and their advisor. And if you're not passionate about business and you are wanting to make stuff, think about which type of agency you work for and what type of relationship. There absolutely is a role for people who make stuff, and it is really important. But I think if you want to create value for organisations out of your strategy, you have to think about how you deliver the strategy versus what you make and the context in which you talk about them.
I think that's wonderfully put, and it reminds me of a consultant who I think has spoken on this stage before, who made a distinction between think for me and do for me, and a decision, a provocation that she offered, which was, which do you want to be? Do you want to be an agency partner that thinks for a client or does for them? both are totally respectable, but it's
respectable
a choice that you need to
and
make.
valued and brilliant and important. But often the strategic relationship of agencies can be undermined by the focus on making stuff, both in terms of how it's managed through the agency and through the client, and the ultimate product and how much you pay for it.
Indeed, indeed. So we have a couple of questions, as you'll all be able to see on the screens. I'm going to give Lisa the choice as to which one she answers, and if there are further questions that come through, then we'll try and cover a selection of them.
I don't know that I have a brilliant answer to example of an agency driving an outcome, but I think probably a good example, and I'm not going to talk about the work, is probably Adam and Eve's relationship with John Lewis is a really good example, I think, of thinking about the outcome they want to drive, both for John Lewis and its sales, but also creating joy around the experience of shopping and them as a retailer. I don't know anything about their relationship, so I can't comment on that, and I can't comment on how Craig and James feel about that relationship, although that dynamic is obviously changing and has changed. Well, but they're a good example for me.
And I think I have been in that boardroom because my then agency also shared the account with Adam and Eve. And what's really clear is that their fortunes are combined. It's really clear that fame and success and financial fortune for one is success for the other. Maybe we'll pick up on Tony's question here. In general, do you think agency teams listen, question and diagnose enough to really understand the challenges, and if not, why not?
I think it's a great question. And I think the answer is no, they don't. I don't think when I worked in an agency, listened hard enough or asked enough questions. I think that the agency, so I think we do at pitches. I think agencies do when they're pitching. And for me, the best examples of agencies working is when you're in pitch mode and you ask all the questions, you have access to all the right people at the client side, and you spend real proper time together as a team answering that question and that problem. But I think that gets very diluted in the ongoing relationships because ultimately, I suspect you are all driven by delivering profit, and often it becomes very quickly, let's move on from the questions and the challenges of today that produce that bit of work to delivering the work, which is why I draw the distinction between being strategic partners and making stuff.
So how do you think you can ritualise that? How do you think you can, within the context of an agency culture, because we've got media agencies here and agencies of every complexion, maintain something of the pitch mindset through the course of the relationship? Are there things that you've tried? So
I think you can, but I think that is to do with having the strategic leads on your business work super closely. So I am a great believer in strategic people, whether they are strategists from a numbers point of view, strategists from a creative point of view, or creative strategists, having direct relationships with clients. And I definitely think if you're going to put account handlers in front of clients, they need to be strategic and able to build a relationship. And I think the compromise comes in the account handler who has to have a strategic relationship and oversee making the work. And that is very difficult. And I get that everyone's working on very lean models. I also think clients need to be encouraged to pay in a different model. One of the things that has absolutely staggered me on the client side, bearing in mind that I'm now in a business at the centre of Virgin that does a lot of deals, we work a lot with banks and we work a lot with lawyers. They get paid a lot more than agencies do, I can tell you. So think about the value you create and think about how to get collectively, perhaps this is a role for the IPA, how collectively you can start to charge a bit more for the value you create, and think about the model rather than the hours you work.
So Lisa won't know this, but it's a wonderful setup for a presentation that we're all about to see in a few short minutes. Okay. So thank you for that. The next question that's come in is really about that perennial balance, or is it a balance between creative output and or neutral creative output and delivering KPIs, goals and targets? A couple of different questions all wrapped into one there.
I think holding a mirror up to a client organisation and being able to be objective enough and outside is important, and I think it's important in selling the work. I do have a particular bugbear, which is sell work that you believe is right for the client, not the work you as an agency want to see made. It's a really obvious distinction, but it happens. I suspect you've all done it. Anyone who's in an account handler role, sold work that you perhaps don't think is quite the right answer. So I do think that's really important. I would hope that I wouldn't have to sacrifice neutrality, creative discipline, creative thinking in order to meet the KPIs of my business. No, I would hope you'd be able to do both. I think it's more about how you work together as an agency and client, how you work within the agency, help everyone from inside the agency understand what you're trying to create for that client. A lot of it, and Brian's talked about it, his philosophy is very close to the Virgin one, which is thinking about the inside out of an organisation. And if you can create that team that really believes in that work, then you're going to be really credible in front of a client, and you shouldn't have to compromise.
Can we riff on that for a minute? Can we talk a little bit about growth mindsets at Virgin and working from the inside out? What does it?
Yeah, sure.
What does that feel and look like?
So I think Virgin is one of those few businesses that the brand is the business and the business is the brand. And particularly where I work, where we're an investment business and a brand business, and that's really all we do. And that means that the brand is everywhere. And the purpose, whilst it is a business purpose, it comes out of the brand. So changing business for good sits at the heart of our business. And very close to changing business for good is how we think about our people. And in some ways we think about our people and our customers in one breath, in that our people are there to serve our customers in the main, and our customers and create a great experience for our customers, which we hope in the end delivers the right outcomes for our businesses from a growth point of view. So that's how we think about it. We are going through the process right now, for example, of rebranding CYBG as Virgin Money. And the first thing that we did was work with them, not an expression I'd heard before, but as on their skewer and on what the purpose is that is going to run all the way through their organisation and cascading that all the way through. So they are making decisions that they've never had to think of before, for example, from a business point of view, around branches. They are thinking about how they make that a customer experience, but for the first time, they're thinking about how is this for my people? I don't think in a business that cares about its people, that wants to deliver purposeful interactions and experiences for our customers, can have a shitty little room out back with a toaster and barely a stool to sit on. So that is a cost implication for them that they are embracing as part of a belief that driving that culture from inside out is what will ultimately deliver them a distinctive experience for their customers and ultimately their growth.
Lisa, thank you.